person or an animal or?
A good-sized man, or something that looks like a man.
Okay. You've had problems in the neighborhood before?
Yeah, my dog was killed here just recently. I don't know what it was.
Welcome to Sasquatch Hypotheses.
Jesus Christ, you better...
Sure.
Dia!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
Son of a bitch is about 6'9".
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh. Is he in your yard, sir?
Yeah, God, he's big.
Okay, what's he doing in your yard?
He's looking at me.
And the guy is on foot.
I don't know what... It's a big, real big person.
But it is a person.
Yeah, I'd say it was a person, somebody really big. But he's all in black.
Is he a black male or a white male? Did you actually see whether, or was he just wearing black?
He's all black and he's big. He is big.
Good evening, folks. Tonight we're going to have another narration by my fiancée, DeeDee. She's going to be reading my 3 encounters that happened in Virginia when I was about 12 years old, which was the first episode of the show, which I've been meaning to redo anyway. So I had DeeDee do it for me, and she did a fantastic job. So let's go ahead and get right into it.
Hi everyone, this is DeeDee here to share another encounter with you. This encounter was experienced by the founder and host of this channel. If any of you don't know who he is, he's Reverend Rick. I invite you all to pull up a stump around our campfire. What you're about to hear is the first episode of his very first show. And it goes like this. The first encounter I had was when I was followed or something was paralleling me in the woods of Virginia in the Blue Ridge Mountains. My grandmother, we called her Granny, prior to living in this house where this happened, lived in an old cabin with no running water. We'd walk down the side of the hill across the road to bring water back to take baths and such. That's the kind of environment this was really, out in the sticks. So she moved into this other house when I was about 11 or 12 years old. It actually had running water, a coal-burning stove, and all that. My sister and I used to go down there and visit with Granny every summer, and we'd stay the entire summer from when I was 11 until the last year I was there I was 15. So one year I was bored and I decided to take a walk through the woods. I walked a couple of miles down the side of the mountain, through the woods, up on the side of the mountain, and just down along the creek road. Went past where Granny used to live and on down. Just guessing, probably a half a mile from the house through the woods, I kept hearing these cracks. Sticks cracking. I was 13. I had no idea. I grew up in Boston. We only spent the summers down there at Granny's. I was pretty much a city kid and had some exposure to the country, just living down there during the summertime, so I wasn't quite strictly city, but I really didn't know or understand the sounds of the forest that much. So I was hearing sticks cracking, and I'm figuring, well, it's probably a squirrel up there, stepping on a branch or whatever it is. While I was walking, this little dog that Granny had used to follow me around everywhere I went. It was like walking around in front of me, and it kept stopping and looking back toward my right side. And I'd turn around and look because it was obvious that the dog was seeing something, and I'd look around and there'd be nothing there. And then I'd walk on, and I'd keep hearing these sticks cracking and leaves rustling off to my side and behind me. I thought that it was probably deer because there were a lot of deer around, and there were black bears as well. So I figured it was probably some animal walking around out there. My family had always told me that black bears won't come near you. They're more scared of us than we are of them. So I wasn't too concerned about a black bear coming near me. I figured I'd know it way ahead of time, and I wasn't too nervous about it. That summer there were black bears that were coming down off the mountain and going through people's trash, so I knew they'd been in the area. So I figured that's what it was. It was some black bear wandering around out there. Since I couldn't see it, it doesn't even know I'm here. It's just walking around doing its thing, and I'm doing my thing. No big deal. So I walked along and kept hearing these sounds for about half a mile. But nothing really eventful ever happened. It was just in hindsight, looking back, that wasn't what it was. It was probably this Sasquatch, because about maybe 2 weeks later, that little dog that was walking around with me, I found him smashed in the mud back by the barn. This house that she was living in, you wouldn't even know it was there. There was the house, a barn, a smokehouse, and a hog pen. She raised chickens and hogs. It was set back in a holler and partially up the side of a mountain. In order to get there, you had to drive through these trees, and you'd plow your car through these trees to get to the house. The branches would scrape along the sides of the car. It was way up on the hillside, so we were kind of isolated back there. There was this barn out behind the house that was even farther back. It was maybe 100 yards back from the house, maybe 200 tops. I was out wandering around one day, and I walked back by the barn because I was always curious about the barn. But we never really went back there because you get out there and it started smelling really funny. It smelled like there was dead stuff back there because it kind of made my stomach turn. I went back there one day to go see what the heck was going on in the barn, and it was full of like old waterlogged hay that had been left there for years, appearing grayish and moldy. So I figured that was probably where the smell was coming from. As I was walking out, I found the little dog that had been missing for a while. Its entire body was flattened out and smashed in the mud. It looked like it had been run over by a truck. I couldn't figure it out. There were no cars around, and there's nothing back there that would have been heavy enough to smash this dog in the mud. I then pulled it up, and it was actually flat. Its skull had been flattened, and it was laying off to the side where the grass was starting to grow. There was a muddy area that led up to the barn, just as on an old road that's been used a lot, where the grass grows in the middle and some that grows along the tracks if no one drives along it for a while. It looked kind of like that. Then it got thicker off to the side. The dog was right along the edge of where the thick grass and the weeds began. It looked like it was in a flat spot. I never looked, and I think that this is honestly part of the problem with people finding things, because when you're not looking for it, you don't see it. Because I wasn't looking to see if it was a big footprint, but that's what I think happened. This Sasquatch stepped on the dog. Anyway, that was the second thing that happened. The same dog that was with me, who kept alerting me to something following me through the woods, was a dog I found flattened out by the barn, which always had a rancid smell, which in hindsight, I suspect that Sasquatch was hanging out in there. Then about a week or so later, my mom came back down from Boston to pick up me and my sister. That night, the adults were all visiting in the living room, and my cousins and I were sitting in the kitchen, and we were all talking about funny things that happened over the summer. I was sitting at the kitchen table, which was up against the back wall of the house. This is an old farmhouse. It had one of those half windows, and it was up toward the top above the kitchen table. My cousin Teresa was sitting to my right, my cousin Curtis was sitting to my left, and my sister was sitting there too. We were talking, and I kind of sat back in my chair laughing at something my cousin Teresa said. Then I looked up at the window and saw 2 white spots in the window. I looked back down and looked back up real quick. Then it suddenly registered with me that I could see the reflection of the light that was above me in part of the window. But then I was seeing these 2 other things, which just as a quick glance I thought was a reflection of something else behind me. I knew there was nothing behind me, and I turned and looked on the wall behind me, and there was nothing there. Just the stove was behind me. Granny had one of those flowery plates on the wall, but that was it. I looked back at the window, and I couldn't figure out what these 2 white spots were. There was a full moon out that night, and I realized that I could see the trees outside. I could see the top of the tree line, so I followed along toward the white shiny spots. Then I saw the outline of what looked like a fur hat. Now I'm like, wait a minute, there's somebody there, and I looked real close. They continued their conversation while I was doing all this. Once I realized that it was what I thought was a hat, and this is crazy because this was August, and it was like 87 degrees. It was a really hot night, and I couldn't figure out who in the hell would be wearing a fur hat. Then I looked over at the 2 light spots and realized that they were eyes. That's not a reflection, that's someone standing there on the other side of the window. I then looked real close, then figured that they must be standing back, so where the light inside the room isn't shining on them. I then began to look really close and waited for my eyes to adjust to the darkness on the other side of the window. It just all of a sudden hit me, and I thought, no wonder why I can't see anyone's face, because they're not white, they're black. Just before I realized it was a black face, I thought, it's got to be my Uncle Carl, who's fixing to scare the hell out of us. So I was about to yell, Carl, what are you wearing that fur hat for? It's hot as hell out there. It had a weird expression on its face, similar to Billy Bob Thornton in the movie Sling Blade, and the crazy facial expression that he makes in the movie. His mouth was drawn way back, and his lips were really fine. Then I thought, well, if this guy is black, He's a Looney Tune because he's got this weird grin on his face. He's looking at my cousin Teresa. The window was above us, and he was looking down at Teresa sitting in the chair. His eyes looked huge and really bugged out, and then, between the mouth and the bugged out eyes, I thought, oh my God, we got some kind of crazy dude outside the house. Then I was just about to say, what the hell are you doing? Get out of here. Something like that. Then it looked at me. Just its eyes darted over toward me. I don't know if Teresa looked at me because I was busy looking at it. When that happened, I realized this isn't a person, this is an animal. If you've ever seen a dog who's trying to protect a bone and they look at you out of the corner of their eyes and then their head will very slowly start turning toward you, that's what it did. Then as soon as it did that, slowly turning its head toward me, it knows I'm looking at it, it's looking at me, and it's doing what my dog does. That's not a person. I could see the texture of its face. What I realized after I stared at it for a minute and my eyes really adjusted was that I was actually seeing its face. It's just that its face was so dark that when I originally started looking, I was looking for a white person standing there. So it wasn't connecting in my mind until I realized it was a black person. When it was staring at Teresa, I saw that big grin on its face and its nose. It was more of a flared nostril, which was very similar to the actor who played the father in the old TV show Good Times. Then suddenly I could see its entire face, and that's when it looked toward me. That's when I began looking at the rest of its face. I thought to myself, it's acting like an animal, but no animal acts like a person. At that time, I'd seen In Search of Bigfoot on TV and similar shows when I was a kid. As far as I knew, it was in the Pacific Northwest over in Washington State. In my mind, there was only one of them, and it wandered around out there. That's what I knew. I completely disregarded it. Years had gone by before this happened, so it never occurred to me while I was looking at this. I had no clue what I was seeing. I just knew it wasn't a person. When I was a kid, I loved to draw monkeys, gorillas, chimpanzees, and skulls around the time this happened. So I was very familiar with what the features of a monkey were, and the first thing that came to me was, well, this is a monkey. Then I thought that it can't be a monkey because he has a nose, and then I began looking at the rest of its face, and there's a feature that I've only heard one person describe in another encounter, which I've never heard anyone else mention. And that's the texture of its face. It's like leather. It's not like a person's face. You could see the lines going up and down as opposed to crow's feet lines. The lines were visible running up and down the face. They were deep, leathery-looking lines, and you could actually see the sheen where the grooves were in the skin. Then I thought, that's a monkey. I then looked at its mouth, and its upper lip appeared to be really long. I could also see the lines, those little faint lines on a monkey's face, from their nose down to the top of their lip. I could see that on this thing. I didn't see any other fur because it was too dark. I could see the outline of its head. Its head was so big in the window that all I could see was from about the top of its brow to just below the bottom lip, and I couldn't see the rest of its head. The picture of the Sasquatch featured on this channel is my interpretation of the rest of it, based on where the fur outline was. What I observed was the texture of the face, the lines on the lips, the very thin lips appearing to be just a line that goes straight across. The feature which wasn't monkey-like was the mouth, which was pushed back. It wasn't quite as protruding and domed-looking. It slightly appeared that way when its head was turned sideways looking toward my cousin. I could see the mouth going around and way back. So it did slightly have that appearance, but so do we. But it was a little more than ours. It wasn't anything like a gorilla or a chimp. It was pushed much farther back. After I stared at it for a minute, it appeared to be really enthused as it was staring at my cousin Teresa. It was really taken with her because the entire time I was looking at it, it never realized that I was looking at it until its eyes darted over to me. I think that they're picking prepubescent kids, and I've heard this before, and I think that the sound of the female voice draws them in. Because the thing was hanging on to everything she was saying, until, of course, it saw me. We stared at each other for a minute, and it wasn't moving. In addition to everything else, I realized it looks like a monkey, but it's not a monkey, and I know it's not a black guy, so I'm thinking in my head, well, it's possible because it had this weird grin on its face. Maybe it's just some escaped lunatic who was born with some kind of weird birth defect, and that's why he looks like this. Then I realized that he's not moving. It was like he's trying to stay perfectly still. It knew I saw it, but it thought if it stayed entirely still, then I couldn't see it anymore. That's the thought that went through my head, because the eyes darted over and its head slowly started turning, like a dog. I don't think that it realized that its head was turning because it was turning so slow. It's almost imperceptible, and I think that it was trying to stay completely still, thinking I couldn't see it. Well, once it did that, I suddenly thought, this is an animal, and this is creepy. It just scared the hell out of me, and I ran. I don't think I've ever run so fast. I jumped, the chair went flying across the room, and I went into the other room. My cousins and my sister followed right behind me, and I said, did you all just see that? They said, no, we ran because you ran. Then my mom and Granny asked, what in the hell's wrong with you? What are you doing? Then I said, there's a weird-looking, I mean really weird-looking black guy looking in the kitchen window. Granny starts laughing, and she says, black guy? There ain't no black people for hundreds of miles around here. I said, well, all I'm telling you is what I just saw in that window. As I'm trying to explain this to them, my grandmother's friend comes up on the porch and comes in the house. She automatically assumes that it was him looking into the window at us. Then I thought, well, I got a good look at this guy, and that was not him, because I've known this guy since I was like 5. It wasn't him. Not only that, the guy could not have made it around the house fast enough to get back in the front door that fast. He was about 85 years old. What are you scaring these kids for? He says, what the hell are you talking about? She then says, what were you looking in the window out there for? He says, I wasn't looking in no window, but I heard something tearing ass up the side of the mountain. My Uncle Mike, who's only 3 years older than me, goes and gets his .22, and I go out the back door with him looking for this thing. The woods were 5 steps from the back door. The kitchen was an add-on to the back of the house, and the door was on the side. So when you walked out the door, you'd walk about 5 steps, and the mountain started at the base of the door, where it started going up. We walked out there, and we were standing behind the door, and we can hear something rustling around in the trees. My Uncle Mike goes running into the trees after it, shouting, I'm going to shoot your ass. Then I don't hear anything, and I'm like, Mike, Mike. I call his name, and he tells me, well, I chased something back in there. I think it was a buck. It was just pounding up the side of the mountain. No one believed me. Chickens were constantly going missing. My grandmother had 2 huge hogs, and nothing ever happened to them. When the chickens would go missing, we would find the chickens with their heads tore off near the woods and back by the barn. When I asked about it, Granny said the hogs bite their heads off when they come near them to eat their food. In hindsight, I think that the Sasquatch was helping himself to the chickens. Well, that's the encounter. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have an encounter that you'd like me to read, pull that trigger back and shoot me an email. My email address is mydd123@gmail.com. Again, thanks for listening.
Another great job by my sweetheart, DeeDee. Thank you, sweetheart. So, folks, I still have a pinched nerve in my neck, so I have to do the show sitting back in my chair. I can't lean forward and type and so forth, otherwise I'd be talking to y'all in the chat. You can join us in Patreon, or not Patreon, but Discord, which is down here in the bottom left corner of my screen. Where are we at here? Right here. And it's also in the description. If you click that link, it'll take you, do the install, the whole 9. You'll go right into my server. So all of y'all click on DeeDee's name, and you can go to her channel and hear just the narrations themselves on her channel. And until next time, y'all take it easy.